This lesson we're going to talk about how to make objects and the landscape recede in the distance by using value, color, and then compositional lines that draw the eye back into the background. In this lesson we're going to look at creating depth in the painting using three aspects of painting. First is value, things getting lighter value-wise as they recede. Second is color, things getting cooler and a little more muted as they recede. And the third is angles and lines in the composition that pull you into the landscape back to the distance. And that also creates a sense of depth, how we use that. And those are fairly obvious. I think you hear them once and you kind of know that's what you're supposed to do. But it's another thing to take a reference that has none of that in it, photograph, or even outside. Sometimes our eye sees the darks in the distance just as dark as they are in the foreground, or a color doesn't seem any cooler as it recedes back on certain days. So we have to be willing to push that in a photo, which is hard to do. We see photographs as reality, and to change it and create color we don't see for the sake of distance sometimes is hard to do. It's something you have to force yourself to do, and it's another good exercise to get out of the habit of just taking what the photograph gives you and just using that. We have to take what we know as well as what we see to create all kinds of different aspects in painting. This is a Edgar Payne, very simple landscape, and it has a little bit of all three and maybe a fourth in there of these aspects of creating depth. First would be the value. Obviously these trees get lighter as they recede back. It's got 4 levels of value change in trees. You know, the 3 front trees, darkest. Then there's a level here, then there's a level back here, and then there's the mountains in the background. And that recedes real well because the values are getting lighter. The second would be temperature. The trees getting cooler as they recede. Everything's gradually getting a little bit bluer. The other 2 colors in the primaries, yellow and red, gradually fade away as objects recede in the distance. The third would be lines in the composition, like lines of the path here, gradually wind and take you back into the distance. And all that works together to create depth on a flat surface. And we look at that and we think, well, sure, that's a simple way of doing it, but when you look at a photograph like this one, there's not a ton of depth, but there is depth. I don't want my canvas to look flat. I have to force myself to think through what's going to be going back farther and what's going to come forward, and how do I change it. So if we're taking this one, this is obvious foreground, and the darks in it underneath the log, in the tree here, they're all going to be the darkest, the next layer. And you want to group them together as much as possible. There's my next layer of value. Darks in here will get a little bit lighter, and then I have a layer back in here. And those will get lighter yet, but I would create another layer, whether it's trees again or mountains, just to create another layer of depth that pulls you back. So I would have 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 4 or 5 layers of shapes gradually getting lighter. And I would have to force it, value-wise, color-wise. This has a nice compositional aspect to it of the trunk, getting thinner as it points back to the background. You know, it's real wide here and gradually getting thinner. I might push that a bit more. Maybe take this log and turn it that way so it angles back a bit more also. So again, those 3 ways to get it simplifies. For one thing, it forces me to take this grouping of trees that's kind of in the middle ground, get them all somewhat of value that recedes back from this tree. And then same thing with the next layer back. That way I'm not copying what I've seen, I'm forcing values into those 4 or 5 layers that give me a sense of depth. We've got another pane here. This is a good example of darkest darks in here, you know, down in here. Strongest color is in here. Color really gets a lot muted back in here. There's still color back in there, but a lot muted compared to the oranges and yellows in here, a lot more muted. Darks are a lot lighter. Lights are a little bit more muted. And then the further back you go, darks get lighter yet until you got the lightest way in the distance. And this really very effective because he forces the color to become a lot more muted, more of a gray values back in here. Warm and cool gray, but nonetheless pretty gray. And here has more saturated color. So that really shoots back quite a ways. This is the photo we're going to use. So if I do the same thing here, and several reasons I like this photo. I mean, it's compositionally, there's just no straight lines. Even the horizon line is on a hill, slanted hill. I've got a angled line this way, or not angled, rounded. Got angled lines of the fence, line of this shrubbery kind of coming that way, and then the fence going back again. So that kind of Z or zigzag or S pattern leads you back into the composition. But then there's nothing but angled lines in here. And if they're not angled enough, I can angle them more. And they're all kind of counterbalanced. Some vertical here with the tree, but even then it's going to be, I can simplify that tree shape. But very nice angled S-curved lines leading you back in the composition. No straight lines. So that's an aside from what we're talking about. But depth-wise, there's not much separation. The color is just as strong back in here as it is up here. There's no difference between this tree and these trees. And you just can't paint it that way. It's just going to be very flat. And darks are just as dark back in here as they are up in here. And I can't paint that either. I mean, this photograph is very flat. It's really good composition, but flat. So I'm going to eliminate this stuff. This gives me more of a definite shape of a tree in here. So that this is one level, all in here. Next level, well, I might include that in that level. Next level is back in here, and I'm going to consciously separate, value-wise, these trees from these trees. The next level would include the house or the barn. Back in there, it's my third level. And fourth would be, even though these are all grouped together, there's enough distance between here and there that I want to separate it. And then a fifth level back in here, and then a sixth level back in there. So, and at my drawing stage, I'm going to make note of really separating them. So when I'm mixing the colors, they're going to gradually recede. Darks get lighter, lights get a little bit lighter, plus more muted. Color-wise, I'm going to go from more yellow greens, orange greens in front, to blue greens, to blue violet, to just blue way in the distance. Very muted blue up in here. And don't hesitate to really push it. And that's uncomfortable sometimes, to take the photograph and just push it to where you're not painting what you see. Even outside, you have to separate things more that way. And compositionally, I'm going to take this fence that goes that way and lead you out, and I will wind it. Of course, the line of shrubbery kind of pulls it this way, and I'll line the fence that way and pull you into the composition. So I'll probably remove that one. Fence-wise, I don't want to have too many fences close together. But I like the fence posts here. And then I would just gradually, they get a little smaller, closer together. Of course, they get thinner. And gradually pull you back into the composition. So those four things we're going to focus on, and get used to the idea of forcing it when you're painting from photographs.